When European conquerors divided up the continent and took Africans' land in the 19th century, it sparked the first significant increase in foreign interest in Africa, known as the Scramble. The second was when East and West competed for the support of newly independent African governments during the Cold War. The Soviet Union supported Marxist tyrants, while America supported despots who pretended to support capitalism. There is currently a third, less dangerous surge. The UN anticipates that by 2025, there will be more Africans than Chinese people, which has drawn the attention of outsiders who recognize the continent's importance and continued growth. Governments and businesses throughout the world are working to strengthen their diplomatic, strategic, and commercial relations. The level of involvement abroad is unprecedented. More than 320 embassies were opened in Africa between 2010 and 2016, which is perhaps the largest embassy construction boom ever. Military relations are also becoming stronger. The fight against jihadism in the Sahel is receiving technology and military support from the United States and France. China is currently the largest supplier of weapons to sub-Saharan Africa and collaborates with 45 other nations on defense technology. Since 2014, Russia has negotiated 19 weapon contracts with African nations. Arab nations with abundant oil resources are erecting bases on the Horn of Africa and employing African mercenaries. If Africa handles the new Scramble wisely, the main winners will be Africans themselves. Today's video, titled The New Scramble for Africa, will be looking at how the European Union, the US, Russia, China, and other world powers are struggling to strike deals with Africa to increase their geopolitical influence on the continent. Let's get started. The European Union. The Scramble for Africa refers to the period of European colonization of the continent of Africa in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During this time, European powers such as Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium competed to claim territories in Africa and extend their imperial holdings. This competition often led to conflict and exploitation as European powers imposed their political and economic systems on African societies. The Scramble for Africa had significant consequences for the continent, shaping its modern political boundaries and contributing to ongoing economic and social issues. European colonization often involved the forced removal of indigenous populations, the exploitation of natural resources, and the imposition of European political and economic systems on African societies. This led to widespread disruption and displacement, as well as the loss of land, resources, and cultural traditions. The European Union intends to invest €1.6 billion in Morocco to support the country's transition to a green economy and the digital age. This plan was announced when the President of the European Commission visited Morocco. The European Union made a strange decision here, as it typically does not make significant infrastructure investments outside of its borders. However, this is a calculated move by the EU to shift the balance of power not only in Morocco, but across Africa. The €1.6 billion committed to Morocco is the beginning of the European Union's planned Global Gateway program, which will see the European Union commit up to €150 billion to support the financing of green energy and digital infrastructure projects in Africa. It's easy to say these projects will enter the game of global geopolitical influence. This huge investment leaves the question of why the European Union is making such a huge investment during this period of economic uncertainty, and the main reason is China. With its Belt and Road Initiative, China has been able to gain strategic influence on the continent with huge investments in infrastructure. In the years since the Scramble for Africa, European powers have continued to exert influence over African nations through economic and political means. The European Union has played a significant role in shaping African policy through its development aid programs and its trade policies. However, the European Union has faced criticism for its approach to Africa, with some arguing that its policies do not adequately address the needs and challenges of African countries. Countries like France have been noted as exploitative, and the French government is running a modern slavery program in its former colonies through its colonial currency. We have an entire video on France's parasitic influence in Africa. We've added the link in the description below. Overall, the legacy of the scramble for Africa continues to be felt in Africa and around the world. The consequences of European colonization, including ongoing economic and social issues, remain a major challenge for the continent and its people. As the European Union and other global powers continue to engage with Africa, it will be important to address these challenges and ensure that the benefits of engagement are shared equitably. Like this video and share it before we continue. Also, subscribe to our channel to be part of the new tourist community and turn on notifications to get alerts when we upload new videos. The People's Republic of China. China's growing presence and investment in Africa in recent years has been referred to by some as a scramble for Africa, in reference to the European colonization of the continent in the 19th and early 20th centuries. However, the term scramble implies competition or conflict, and while there may be tensions between China and other nations with interests in Africa, China's involvement in the continent is largely driven by its own economic and strategic interests. China's activities in Africa include building infrastructure, such as roads, railways, and ports, investing in natural resources, such as oil and minerals, and providing development aid in the form of loans and grants. These activities have been controversial, and some critics have raised concerns about the potential negative impacts on African economies and societies. China and Africa have a long history of interaction that dates to the Cold War era. China has strengthened its political and economic ties with African nations recently through several initiatives, including trade agreements, financial investments in infrastructure projects, and humanitarian aid. The Belt and Road Initiative, a significant infrastructure development project that aims to connect Asia, Europe, and Africa through a network of roads, railways, and ports, is one of the most notable examples of China's expanding presence in Africa. Through the initiative, China has signed deals with several African countries to build roads, railways, and other infrastructure projects, as well as to provide financial assistance. Some of the countries that have signed deals with China under this initiative include Kenya, Egypt, and Ethiopia. The fact that China's involvement in Africa is primarily aimed at serving Chinese interests rather than advancing African development is one of the main criticisms leveled at this country. Critics argue that Chinese-built infrastructure projects often use Chinese labor and materials, and that Chinese companies often extract resources from Africa without sufficiently benefiting the local economy. Additionally, some have expressed concerns about the terms of the loans and grants provided by China and the potential for African countries to become indebted to China. Overall, China's scramble for Africa has generated both opportunities and challenges for the continent. While Chinese investment has brought some benefits, such as improved infrastructure and access to capital, it has also raised concerns about the potential for exploitation and the long-term sustainability of African economies. It will be crucial to address these worries and make sure that the advantages of Chinese investment are distributed fairly as China's involvement in Africa increases. Russia. Involvement between Russia and Africa dates to the Soviet era, when it helped numerous African nations militarily and economically. Russia's involvement in Africa in recent years has been primarily motivated by economic and strategic considerations. Through investments in natural resources like oil and minerals, as well as the export of weapons and other military hardware, Russia has sought to strengthen its economic ties with African nations. Russia's activities in Africa have been controversial, and some critics have raised concerns about the potential negative impacts on African economies and societies. For example, there have been allegations of corruption and illicit activities in Russia's arms trade with Africa and concerns about the sustainability of African economies that are heavily dependent on the export of natural resources. Additionally, some have criticized Russia's involvement in African conflicts, arguing that it has contributed to instability and violence. Despite these concerns, Russia's involvement in Africa has continued to grow in recent years. In 2019, Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted a summit in Sochi, Russia, with leaders from various African countries to strengthen economic and political ties. Russia has also been involved in peacekeeping operations in Africa, such as in Sudan and the Central African Republic, and has sought to expand its military presence on the continent. Overall, Russia's dealings with Africa are complex and multifaceted. As Russia's involvement in Africa continues to evolve, it will be important to closely monitor its actions and ensure that they are in the best interests of both Russia and Africa. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel before we continue. More likes encourage us to keep working on interesting videos like this one. Let's get back. The United States of America. The US was the first nation to publicly criticize Chinese involvement in Africa. Washington is beginning to understand that there is a significant trade and investment potential in Africa. The US-Africa Summit of December 2022 is a sign that the US is beginning to wake up. The United States has a long history of engagement with Africa, and its involvement on the continent has evolved. In recent years, the US has focused on promoting economic growth and development, strengthening democratic institutions, and addressing security challenges in Africa. The US has provided development aid to African countries and has also worked to increase trade and investment through initiatives such as the African Growth and Opportunity Act. In addition to economic and development assistance, the US has also been involved in efforts to address security challenges in Africa. This has included providing military assistance and training to African countries, as well as participating in peacekeeping operations and counter-terrorism efforts. The US has also played a role in mediating conflicts and promoting peace and stability on the continent. However, the US has faced criticism for its approach to Africa, with some arguing that its policies do not adequately address the needs and challenges of African countries. The US is rather trying to force its policies and societal values on Africans, trying to talk African leaders into accepting and legalizing things that Africans don't think are right for them. Additionally, the US has faced competition from other global powers, such as China and Russia, which have also sought to increase their influence in Africa. The former AU ambassador to the USA, Dr. Erikana Chihambori-Quo, believes that the United States is losing because they're trying to tell Africans and their leaders what to do, and in a disrespectful manner. She argues that African leaders were invited to the US-Africa Summit with no agenda. They just went to listen to what the US had to say. In general, the US maintains a sizable presence in Africa, and its involvement in the region is likely to change over the next few years. It will be crucial for the US to consider the perspectives and needs of African nations as it works to advance its interests in the continent and to make sure that any decisions it makes benefit both the US and Africa. India. Another nation that has been discreetly expanding its economic influence in Africa is India. The nation has increased the number of its diplomatic posts on the continent recently and is currently the continent's third largest commercial partner. India thinks it has a competitive advantage over China because of its shared experience as a colonial power, the use of the English language, and the presence of over 3 million Indians in Africa. Additionally, New Delhi asserts that Indian initiatives in Africa place a strong emphasis on hiring local labor, in contrast to China, which frequently imports laborers from its own country. Turkey. Turkey is extending its presence throughout the continent as well. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's goals on the continent are reflected in the rise of the country's embassies there, from 12 in 2009 to 44 now. Erdogan is the world leader with the most trips to the region, having visited 28 different African countries during his 38 trips since taking office. As a result of this diplomatic effort, Ankara and African nations' commercial ties have significantly increased. Turkey and Africa's trade increased from $5.4 billion to $25.3 billion last year over the past 20 years. Turkey sent military attaches to 19 African countries, including Morocco, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Mali, Algeria, Djibouti, Senegal, Kenya, and South Africa. There's no doubt that the US feels threatened by China's growing influence in Africa. This is the time for African countries to embrace this struggle for influence because it gives them more options. Africa has the chance to accelerate its development by utilizing its resources and its 1.2 billion person market, the majority of whom are young people. The African youth must wake up from their slumber and seize these opportunities now to secure a better future for the next generation. We require trustworthy partners and contributors. Once more, Africa rejects the offer to serve as the stage on which Chinese, American, and European rivalries can be played out. We hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The New Tourist for more interesting videos about Africa. Turn on notifications to get alerts when we upload a new video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.